You gotta get a different, like...
What do you want from me?
I'm just messing with
you. What do you think? Scorsese? Get out of here.
One more time.
Yeah.
Welcome to Triple Guitars. My name is Chris. Behind the camera is Matt, working his magic with the opening sequence there.
I don't know what you want from me.
In the last episode,
you get what you pay for.
Exactly. In the last episode, we showed you guys how we went about cutting the tenon and mortise for this guitar. And today, we're going to do the absolutely crucial step of setting the neck on this guitar. And I'm excited to show you guys how I go about doing it. There's a million ways to skin the cat. All it's going to take for us today is a little bit of sandpaper and some chisels. It's a really, on paper, simple job of just getting everything to line up, but it can just be a little bit finicky because of work holding and a lot of other things. So just to give you a rundown of what I'm doing to hold this guitar is I do have this giant vacuum clamp that I have made that's going to hold the guitar in place. Part of the situation with you at home that are following along is coming up with a way of your own to get your guitar held nice and stable. So I do recommend either you use one of these larger, what do we call these? The pattern maker vices.
Yeah.
These work really great. Or you can, there's lots of things online that you can look up for guitar holding, but that is going to be something important if you are planning on doing this step yourself. So I just want to get that out of the way at the very beginning. So, what is the purpose of this step? I think is what is important to broadcast to you guys. So with the mortise and tenon cut, we're actually able to get the neck, in its general location. But what we now need to do is get it so that when we run our two bolts into this, because this is going to be a bolt-on neck, that the angle on this guitar is correct. I'm going to use this to help us illustrate a little bit better. The angle this direction, whether the neck is going left or right, as well as, and more importantly, I think, is the angle in this direction. Getting all of that to line up so that by the time we glue our fretboard on, we put our frets on it, and then we put our strings on top of it, and then tighten those strings, which is then going to cause the belly of the guitar to come up so that all that geometry locks in place perfectly so that you're not chasing your tail at the very end of the build. So I know for me particularly, what obviously having the guitar neck lined up in this direction, left to right, pretty straightforward, right? You just got to get it lined up down the center. But for me, getting this angle, what I know for my guitars is I want a 2mm gap if I put a straight edge on this guitar neck at where the bridge location is going to go. And if I can get to that point, as well as get my left to right alignment done, then I'm good. And that's something that I've just learned over years and years and years of doing these. And that
I guess that number would vary if you're doing your own build.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a hard and fast.
Yeah, just to give you guys a quick rundown of how and why those numbers work for me is I use a 1/4 inch thick fretboard is what the final thickness is. I use a 16-inch radius on these fretboards. And then I put in a medium-sized fret. And then what I use on my bridge is I'm switching back and forth. I use a 10mm thick bridge. So with all of that combined with the amount of deflection that I put into the tops of my guitar, by the time I string it all up, everything's pretty much dialed in. So that's what we're shooting for on this guitar. So what we need to do now is what's called doing the floss. Fun fact, not the dance. Because I don't know how to dance. But if you wanted to, I assume you could dance while doing this. You'd be flossing at that point. But what I use for this is 60 grit? Yeah, 60 or 80 grit sandpaper. I find it works really well for me is this is actually the double, or the adhesive backed, but I leave the backing on it because this part right here slides really nicely on the wood. And what we're gonna do, the first step is to just put our sandpaper in between here, and we're gonna pull it until we get a perfect no gaps down here at the edges of the neck. That's kind of just getting it kind of established. So on both sides of the neck, I'm gonna sit here and floss it with sandpaper until I make sure that there's no gaps here at all. Once we've done that, I can then assess how far off we are on different measurements and then start making adjustments accordingly. But so that's what I'll do right now. Okay, I'm gonna pull this off the clamp so that I can check everything here. Maybe I'm gonna pull it off the clamp. Wait for it.
Clamp says no.
I know. Yeah. There we go. So I've got this thing roughly flossed, and I want to get Matt in here to show you guys how nice and tight that looks. Is it working?
Holy exposure, Batman. All right.
Can we see?
Yeah, I can see now. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So you guys can see here how good and tight this joint is right here. That looks really good. This one, there's a little bit of a gap right now, but if I push down on it, I can get it to close up. And that's what matters for me right now, because we don't have our bolts in here yet, so I don't have anything to like give it downward pressure. That was my stage one kind of initial goal here. In order to make that work though, I want to give you guys a good view of what this looks like in here, right? Mm-hmm. It does look a little crappy, I know, but that's just kind of how the nature of this beast is. These are what I would refer to as the cheeks out here on the edge. These are our points that are contacting the body. Inside of here, what I've done is I've actually taken a chisel and I've kind of scooped all of that out so that you can see that it's a little bit kind of arched here, because I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time with my sandpaper trying to floss a bunch of material that's just making this process take forever. So going ahead and removing material so that, let's see if we can capture it on camera at all. Yeah, so there we go. That's a good illustration of it. These areas right here, having an air gap in there, that's perfectly fine. In fact, it's what I aim for, because if I'm going to spend all this time flossing, I really want to just be removing material from the outside in. So we've got this in place now. So what I need to do is check for those two angles that we talked about. So I'll show you guys what I do here. We're going to take a straight edge, lay it on the fretboard here, and I'm going to push down on the neck so that I know that I'm getting good purchase on that part. I'm going to raise it up so that it's nice and flat. It's a little bit of doing here, but you can see there's no gap.
Right.
Zero gap right now. So I know that I'm going to need to kick the neck back a little bit. That we know now, so I can keep that, kind of file that away. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to check for straightness on the neck, and I do have this old, worn out and tattered neck alignment jig that I bought somewhere on the internet like 15 years ago. I'll show you guys two ways to go about doing this though. It goes on there, you tighten it up, and then what I can do is see the center line. I want that center line obviously to line up dead center with where my binding joints. The really cool thing about this jig is that if you're taking a reading from all the way down at the end of your guitar, you know that it's going to be perfect where the bridge goes. If you don't have this, the way to go about doing this is I put a little piece of masking tape down here. I'll take my straight edge and basically ride it along here. I have a longer straight edge that I would do this with. I take a pencil line and mark here, and I would mark on this side where that line is, and then what you would do is you take your calipers and you're looking for equal distance between those 2 points. It's a little bit of doing, and it sucks. You go back and forth. So what I do recommend is you go online and try to find yourself. I'll try to do the work for you and find this neck alignment jig for you and put a link down below so that you guys can just buy it. So now I know that the neck is a little bit too far that way, and I need more of a gap this way. So we need to kick it back, and I'm gonna exaggerate, but I also need to make sure that this neck is angled a little bit this way. Remember, Matt's the engineer here. I'm just the dumb guitar builder. But the math on a situation like this, the tiniest little bit of material removed here is going to kick this headstock back a lot because of just the distances that we're talking about. And then you're also going to magnify that distance all the way over here at the bridge location. So just because I'm 2 millimeters off down here, that's not going to take much at all. And the same thing with here, removing the material from one cheek. So if it's too far this way, that means that I need to remove material from the same side. I need to remove material from this side so that the neck kicks back this way. But I only need to remove just a little bit. Now, one more thing that I want to point out is because of the tight fit of this mortise and tenon, if I raise this up, you can see that it's not going to allow me to move very much because the tenon itself is banging into the sidewall. So if you can't get it to go where I need it to go, what I'll actually have to do is remove just a little bit of material from the tenon itself. So what I'm going to do right now is you need to pick one. Are you going to focus on getting it aligned left to right, or are you going to focus on getting it aligned forward and backward? What I like to do is to focus on getting it aligned left to right first, and then worry about the angle that kicks it back. So I'll do that now. I'm going to slowly remove material off of this side, and then check my work, and then do it again and check my work until it's dead center. One other thing that I want to point out, if you find yourself chasing your tail and you're flossing this neck, and suddenly, no matter how many times you pull your sandpaper here, it's just not taking off any material, what can be happening is that there's not a gap between the bottom of the tenon and the mortise. You do need some sort of gap, because what happens is if this bottoms out inside that pocket, obviously as you go to sand, it can only go down so far. It starts to bottom out. So what you would do is, if you are bottoming out, you're going to take some sandpaper and sand down a little bit of material off the end of your tenon. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, I'll get her back on the clamp, and I'm actually going to do it with the front facing me this time so that I can check my work as I go. But I'm sweaty and I'm hot, but that's the process here. So a little bit more sanding, not much at all, got us to where we needed to. This is taking a little longer than it would if you're using kind of more of the traditional mahogany Spanish cedar neck. Maple necks, they suck. They're a pain in the butt. There's a lot more work because you're sanding on end grain and it's the whole thing. But you can see, oh Jesus, you can see here when I give it good downward pressure, pretty much lined up perfect, right?
Yeah.
So that feels really good, but if I run my straight edge on here, let me get the neck flush. Put our straight edge on here, we're still like, there's no gap. There's zero gap at all. So now what I need to do is remove material from the back half of the neck. And so what I like to do so that I don't mess up all the work that I just did, like the left to right work, is I'll keep count of how many pulls I'm doing. So I'm gonna push pressure on the back of the heel of the neck, and I'm gonna do the same method, but I might do 5 pulls and then 5 pulls and 5 pulls and 5 pulls. Check my work. But that way I'm not losing the left to right movement on it at all. But that's going to be what I need to do next to get this perfect. It happens to be that my binding is 2 millimeters thick that I use on my guitar, so that's kind of what I'll use that as a feeler gauge between the straight edge, so that I know that I'm getting that perfect how I want it. So cool. Back in the clamp for some more sanding.
Yeah.
Okay. Matt just said I called my shots. I think we're there. Did some more pulling. I ended up needing to, and I want to point this out to you guys, I ended up needing to remove a little bit more material off, I'm sorry, Matt, remove a little bit more material off the center section. Okay. Because what was happening is, as I was getting more and more pulled, getting the neck angle to kick back here, it was bottoming out on this back spot, so I couldn't do it. So once again, if you're having trouble, if you're setting a neck and you're finding that it's just not it's not getting to where I need it to, check and see if you're having anywhere that's bumping into something and it's not working. So I'm gonna push down good on here. We'll put make sure that this is nice and flush with the front of the guitar. Right there. We'll get our straight edge. We'll set it on here. So there we go. There's our gap, roughly in the bridge location. I'm not gonna take the time to sit out and measure it all. We're so close to getting that thing exactly where we want it. So we saw how close that was. It is so close. I can probably do a couple more pulls of my paper, but I'm also going to check my left-right alignment, make sure I haven't messed that up at all, and it's still perfect, right where I want it. So yeah, I think I am just going to give this 1 or 2 more pulls till I get it right, because I don't want to be getting in the ballpark. We want to make sure that we get it right. So just a couple more pulls, and we'll check right back in. All right, just a couple more pulls. Let's see what kind of gap we're working with here, and I think we're pretty much there. Oh yeah, look at that. You just love to see it. That's what I'm shooting for. Once again, that's what I'm shooting for based off of the geometry on my guitars. If you're just getting going, you need to kind of do the math of like how thick is your fretboard, how tall your fret's going to be, and then how tall is your bridge. Remembering that when this is all said and done, once you glue your fretboard on and you get the frets on it, the goal is to have a straight edge sit on top of all of that, and then the very tip of that straight edge should intersect with the very top of your bridge. So that's kind of the finishing point. So you need to do the math backwards to figure out what this gap needs to be on top of just the neck itself, if that makes sense to you guys. But the next step on this, and that we're not going to do on camera because it's pretty self-explanatory, is I'm going to put some threaded inserts into the bottom of this tenon, and then we're going to line those up with 2 holes that I'm going to drill right here so that we can get this neck actually attached to this guitar. And at that point, we're ready to finally glue the fretboard onto this thing, and it's going to look like an actual guitar, and I'm super excited about that. We're getting to the last few steps of the physical construction of this guitar, and we appreciate everybody that's followed along. Make sure that you guys do like and subscribe, and we'll see y'all in the next one.